Welcome to The Democratic Voice, your community action program dedicated to bringing you the issues that impact America and concern Colorado. Brought to you every week at this time by the El Paso County Democratic Party, your voice in the future of Colorado's.
And so, a minute, please, because you have lots of questions waiting for you. And also, Rocky Scott asked for 30 seconds. I deem that within the time frame, so we'll let Commissioner Brown, would you care to make a brief statement?
No, I have no response.
Commissioner House, no.
Then I will make a brief response. The Tea Party's comments refer to history, and I'm glad you did that. If you've ever read the book John Adams, it'll be an enlightening experience for you as to what government officials go through. But this nation was founded as a democratic republic and with a representative government. And one of the more difficult things to do, and it's been true from the beginning of this country, when there was a very significant group of British loyal subjects who did not want to become their own country. And if they had failed, we'd all be talking to the Queen right now about this probably. But the fact is, one of the harder things to do when you're sitting up there on the dais is to realize you may have 50 or 100 passionate people in your audience, but you serve 536,000 people. Think about the press coverage that this meeting has gotten. You can't get any more than that, believe me. And we have a good room full of people, but it's a very, very small fraction of 536. We have to always try to have a sense of what the majority in this county would do in a given situation, respect the minority, listen to the minority, and where they're protected by constitutional protections, then we go with the minority. But otherwise, our job is to try to do our best to represent the majority. Thank you.
Thank you. Rocky?
Thank you. Very briefly, I just want to apologize to those who came here expecting that this was all going to be about building the future. The inflammatory language that unfortunately came from the last statement was not indicative of the intent of this meeting. And for those of us who were part of the process of putting all this together and came here to help build community, we again apologize for the content of the meeting, of that statement, and hope that as we go forward, we will all be operating in good faith with the original intent of this meeting. Thank you.
There's a balance that is difficult to achieve, and what for some people is inflammatory is for other people speaking from the heart. And so this is one of the places where we probably will have to agree to disagree and continue with the discourse, because I think it has been an excellent time of discovery and questioning. The challenge before me in terms of sorting through questions to figure out which ones are the most important is actually impossible. Therefore, I'm going to take the stack of process questions and go through them in the hopes that we may actually be, some of them may be answered quickly. The responses, if you can do them in a minute, is that, I guess what I'm going to say is, since I don't really know whether these questions are 1-minute questions or 2-minute questions, if you think you need 2 minutes to respond, say that, and our timekeeper will give you the 2 minutes. Otherwise, do them briefly. If we can get to as many as possible, that's the ideal. Again, I remember that all your questions could not possibly be answered, and be respectful of that reality. Commissioner Huffman. Were you trying to get around the Open Meetings Act, which would have mandated public meetings? Why did you have the next level development consultant inefficiently meet 3 times with commissioners rather than once?
Well, because of the law. There is an open meetings law where if you have more than 2 commissioners in a room, it has to be declared, there's an open meeting, etc. What you will find is that the commissioners meet 2 at a time with all kinds of people. It's the way we do the background preparatory work on things. It's a effort in progress or a movement in progress when we do this. We do it all week long, where somebody wants to talk to all 5 commissioners, and as a courtesy, we try to do it 2 at a time to enable that. There was no intention to get around open meetings. It was a work in progress, and work in progress is not covered by open meetings, because that's how we staff things as we're doing them, so we don't confuse you with what we're thinking before we make it, before we make it good. Believe me, that can get confusing sometimes.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Howells, what was the process the county used to validate the current requirements for the courthouse and jail?
Actually, I'm not sure I really understand that, validate the current requirements. As I said, we had a committee that was meeting, we had subcommittees that were continually bringing information back to the commissioners, and as I said, that was primarily through the county administrator and Henry Sondheimer. Again, we were saying validate the requirements. Actually, if you're just saying, someone like a judge or gave us, these are the requirements we need, sure, I guess we looked at those and read them. Are they, are they something that we have to totally not vary from? No, I wouldn't say that's the case. I don't think we really did validate those requirements, if I'm understanding the story right. And I'm not even sure where the requirements actually do come from, other than when we're looking at building a courthouse or expanding a jail, certainly we have certain criteria that we're looking for and goals we're trying to meet.
I'm aware that if the commissioners differ, that it is appropriate for a second commissioner to respond if you have a different viewpoint, so feel free to raise your hand. Let me give this one to Commissioner Brown. Why did you not take, since this one wasn't specified as to who should answer, why did you not take additional steps to educate the public regarding the need for the jail complex, including brochures, TV ads, mailings?
We did everything we could to get the press and the media to give information to the public as we were disseminating it through our process of these 2 projects. We could not get the good cooperation that we felt we should have. I personally visited over 20 different groups during the period of time when we were talking about the ballot issue to fund the jail construction bonds. I had good reception at those meetings. They were service clubs, there were some private clubs, there were several different groups of people that I talked to. They understood what we were going through and what we needed to do. Sadly enough, we could not get the public process through the media to give us that information. We were precluded by law when the ballot issue was set. We could not spend county monies publicizing the issue. It had to be by private sources. Therefore, we did what we could to the private sector to disseminate information, and hopefully we will get better cooperation from the media in these future years.
Let me ask you one more, because it seems appropriate as chair. Will the county commissioners consider holding their regular meetings in the evenings, parenthesis, all the time, so that more of the public has a chance to participate in the public process?
If the public wishes to be at those meetings, we will hold meetings in the evening, no question about it. We've had evening meetings, we've had budget meetings. For the last 12 years, I've been serving the county in this position as a commissioner. We get a very small evening crowd. It doesn't seem to be the time people want to meet. If there's a group of people who would like to have us meet in the evening, we can accommodate that. We have the accommodations for it at our county building. So let us know. We get a flood of letters or calls or whatever you need. Let us know what you want to do. That's why we're here today. We're trying to get you to generate some information for us so we can act on that. So that's what I'm saying. Give us your information and we'll act on it.
This looks like another question for you, Commissioner Huffman. At a December Commissioners meeting, I believe Tom Huffman said he had refrained from discussing the ramifications of a no vote on the jail. He said this was because the attorney had warned against campaigning from his office. Wouldn't it have better served the public interest if the commissioners had made it clear what the consequences would be?
Well, there's some misinformation in there in that it's not illegal for commissioners or elected officials to go out and campaign one way or another. And I believe we all did go out and speak to public groups. The fact is, once you set a ballot issue, you can't use county assets, including county employees, to do such a thing. Can I see that just a second? I can't remember exactly what the full wording is. Okay, wouldn't it have served the public better if we had made clear the consequences? One of the things that in fact, one of our, I guess currently chief critics said to us at a meeting, and I agree, was you don't go threatening the public with all the horror stories that are going to happen if you don't get your ballot issue passed. You cannot, by the way, put that on the ballot, what will happen if it doesn't pass. You can't put reasons on the ballot. You simply have to ask for the question for the tax increase. So you don't threaten the public. You've seen it done before, people. It has angered you when it was done. A government entity threatening you with the sky falling if a tax issue doesn't pass. The tax issue doesn't pass and the sky doesn't fall. And you lose credibility doing that. I would certainly say we've lost credibility anyway, but that was one of the things that we did not want to do, was threaten the public. But we made no secret that we had to do the jail. If the tax issue didn't pass, we still had to do the jail, and it would have never been on the ballot if we had had the money to do it without cutting programs. That's the logical thing. If you can think logically, realize you don't put things on the ballot asking for a tax increase if you can do it without a tax increase. If we had, you'd have criticized us for that.
I won't move her too. I don't know, hopefully I'll try to, and if I have some time, I'll go with it. Again, I disagree with Commissioner Huffman. I do not think that because folks determined to vote against a property tax increase, that somehow we can still interpret that they still wanted us to build the jail off some sort of existing funds. First of all, none of us know what the voter really thought. It would never be so pompous just to say, we'll tell you what you meant at the ballot box. After the November 5th election, I did ask my fellow commissioners again to stop. I said, we've had a very decisive ballot question. Let's reevaluate perhaps both projects. Maybe one should be put on the back burner, particularly since there was a lot of controversy with the courthouse at this point in time. I still believe we would have better served the public had we done that then and there. And if we were going to have to make these budget cuts, have a real discussion on it so that folks would know, so that we don't all of a sudden leave our public in limbo, particularly those depending so much on transit to get to their jobs.
Commissioner Huffman, you have admitted to insufficient public process. It's not too late. Are you willing to appoint a community task force to work with the architects to analyze all the issues, that is, courthouse site, contiguous or not, transportation, architectural program, etc.?
Transportation.
I imagine that's two in front of that.
To and from the courthouse, I guess. It's certainly going to be a public process. Whether we would do a task force or not would be something that the commissioners would have to address, and to what degree we can retroactively deal with this situation is really governed by the threat of loss of the money to do it, the bonds, etc. So I would say I'd have to discuss that with my fellow commissioners, but one thing that doesn't need to be discussed is that there will be public involvement. The public is invited to interface with the architect from the very beginning of this process once an architect is chosen.
Thank you. To Commissioner Howells, what was the public process used to evaluate possible cuts in other county departments prior to cutting public transit and the health department?
Not too much. The vote was November the 5th. On November 6th, we all knew the result of that vote. On November 7th, the Board of County Commissioners, under public comment, and the Board of County Commissioners meeting that day, we talked about the results. We talked about still the need for the expansion of the jail. Every commissioner made comments on the importance of public safety. Our county administrator then told us that he would begin looking at how we could perhaps still do both projects. It would mean, he, as in his words, really taking the hide out of some programs and services. I write a weekly column. I immediately got that into the column. I wanted to hear from people. I was in quite a quandary, again, things moving really quickly. Cut to the chase here, we did have a public meeting. Requesting that we had the public meeting on November 21st, and we did have quite a bit of the public that came in and was able to speak on that day.
Since we've been talking budgets, let's go into some of the questions that were addressed to finance. Since so many addressed to the other commissioners, Commissioner Brown, let me ask you this one. You propose borrowing funds to pay the interest on the $80 million debt for the first 3 years of the life of the loan. Where would you find funds to pay our debts if the economy does not turn around in 3 years? Should we choose to end the lease on the courthouse and the jail, what would happen to the county credit rating? I should have a different intonation on that one. Should we choose to end the lease on the courthouse and jail, what would happen to the county credit rating?
Well, the question, what would happen to it would go to zero. We would never get another credit rating. Is that the question?
Well, the first question was, where would you find funds to pay our debts if the economy doesn't turn around in 3 years?
Well, we'd have to find the funds out of current revenues. And that would mean possibly further cuts in services, non-mandated services.
Commissioner Huffman, actually this wasn't addressed to anyone in particular. I'm taking turns with these 3 questions. If the sold cops are tied to a specific site and an alternate site is determined at a non-contiguous location at higher cost, will the county require additional funds?
Well, the quick answer to that is almost certainly. But I would say for a more detailed answer, I would refer to our folks down here, the staff folks, to give you a more detailed answer on that. But what we've done is we have tried very hard to find the site that would be the most cost-effective, not necessarily the most popular, but the most cost-effective site to build that courthouse, with the concept that the majority of the citizens in this county are interested in the cost-effectiveness of the county.
Thank you. Commissioner Howells, Tabor has often been blamed for the county's failure to set aside funds for jail and courthouse. Isn't there a process by which the county can put funds in reserve even with Tabor?
With that said, one idea I did have, and I brought it to my commissioners over time, never really got anywhere with my request, but when we had a mill levy that was still pretty healthy, I asked my commissioners to join me, and I will say Commissioner Huffman was not on the board at that point in time, to join me in going to you, the voter, explaining our needs, also explaining if we could freeze that mill levy, maintain that mill levy, what we could begin to do with those funds and set them aside for some capital projects, such as a jail. I did not get any support from my fellow board members, and I just want to say real quick, nor from the non-board elected officials, except for our Dan County Treasurer, Ken Kyle, who saw the good common sense of this idea approach.
I have to disagree with some of that statement that was made by my fellow commissioner. When that issue was brought forward, our mill levy was 9.45 mills, if I recall. Tabor required a reduction in that to meet our mandated Tabor-regulated revenue. We subsequently reduced that mill levy to 7.33 or whatever the number is. I can't recall exact numbers. Under that threat that if we didn't do that, we would be sued by the author of Tabor. My choice was to keep the mill levy by a vote of the commissioners. We could have done it. 2 commissioners wished to keep the mill levy at the higher level. 3 commissioners wished to reduce it. So that's the reason for the reduction there.
I must address this. Commissioner Brown is totally confused over what I just said. This issue about the 3-2 vote on maintaining the mill levy had nothing to do with what I said at the point in time several years ago when the mill levy was higher than the 9.43 suspension. I'd have to go back in records and check and see what it was. But what he has just spoken to is nothing at all of what I just spoke to regarding maintaining the mill levy a few years ago.
I'm sorry, that was not correct. I will leave it at that.
Yes, back to the philosophical a little bit. I'm so sorry. Maybe not really philosophical, but contemplative, if you will. If, since the beginning of Tabor, this county had set aside money that would enable us to build both jail and courthouse now, out of current funds, we would have had to set aside over $6 million a year. And that's a rough estimate. I can't give you the exact numbers. I'm sure Mr. Bruce can. But anyway, think about that, folks. We are taking an absolute whooping for trying to set aside that much or less now in 2002, 2003. What about in 1994? We had tried to take $6 million out of county programs and set it aside. First of all, I don't think it would have been legal under Tabor for that amount. But secondly, if it had, I mean, the uproar that we're causing now, think about what the uproar would have been then. And the other thing is, look at the reality. Do you think commissioners would have been able to keep their fingers off of $30 million sitting off to the side? We would have found something to do with it.
All right, let's move to another question. For Commissioner Howells, I just found out that of the $40 million budget for the jail building, $10 million is to be used for rehab of the old jail. Is that true and justified?
I just found that out too, and is it true and justified? I do not know. Actually, a citizen brought the $10 million question to me before it was actually even reported in the newspaper. I probably have to think about that a little bit, but it seems like if you need the rehab and part of that $10 million is in there, then making it $30 million less to do some rehab to the jail that is necessary, then I would assume it's justified. Have I seen exactly what that rehab is all about? No, but I know I have the folks here that can tell me what that rehab entails and can tell you too.
I think staff could answer that question very quickly.
Very quickly, that number's been available and was presented by the Sheriff's Department a long time ago. And what it is to make the old part of the jail compatible with the new part. For example, the cafeteria, the food service part of the jail was contained in the old jail. If you add 850 prisoners, or the capability for that, you have to increase the ability to provide food services. Medical is wholly contained in the old jail. There will not be a new food facility or medical facility in the new addition. So you have to upgrade. This is not a remodeling of the old jail just because we can get the money. This is a situation where we are affecting the old jail so that we'll be able to support the new addition to the jail. And that's been out there on the table from the very beginning.
Those are ancillary needs for the expansion of the facility. And I think our facilities manager can explain that, or the sheriff can explain it very easily, that you don't add space without adding ancillary facilities for that space.
Speaking of, is it true, let's ask this question. The Gazette, and any of you commissioners that want to take a stab at it, please let me know. The Gazette this morning reports that there are 250 empty beds at our courthouse jail facility.
That's
is
erroneous.
this true?
That is erroneous. That is the state system. That's a Department of Correction system of the state. And someone found out that there possibly is a juvenile system facility available and reported that to the Gazette. It is a Department of Corrections issue, not a county issue. It's a state issue.
And it is a potentially available, because that's our available at this point. We only wish we had the only, we wouldn't be able.
One other question, has the
Initially, something that we were given to take would be available. It apparently is a possibility now, and I encourage you, talk with your city council people, because we'd love to look at Vermont. The reason the west end cannot be capped as the east end is because it's subtle, but there's a difference in distance between the west end of the building and Cascade and the east end of the building and Tejon. And courtrooms need to be a certain size. That size is directed and determined at the state level, not here. You cannot fit the courtrooms in the way they need to be fit in if you go to the west end and put the entire project on the west end. To cap both ends with a lower facility is two separate building projects, adds to the cost. But they're still, folks, all on the table. But that was our rationale, or the rationale of the consultant when they came up with what they thought was the preferred concept plan.
I'll just be real brief in my response to that. I think that very question illustrates why you need a public process. That's where you begin to go through all the questions, all the ideas, all the concerns, everything, put it on the table, and then get those questions answered before you've made the critical decisions.
Another question for Commissioner Huffman. Let me try the handwriting. Since you have admitted the design and construction plans for the courthouse have not been finalized, why did the board borrow about $40 million last month, which means you will be paying interest before you need the money? Why not cancel the debt until you are prepared, then ask the voters to borrow?
Certainly seems like a reasonable question from the business standpoint. One of the things we had to do was to show that we could come up with that type of money. So we had to come up with a figure, we had to collateralize that figure, and then we had to get the financing approval for an amount. And that stuff needs to be done fairly early in the process. You can't start building and then borrow the money later. But for a more definitive description of the actual thinking, keep in mind the commissioners are like a board of directors. We have a lot of staff, a lot of experts that we consult with as far as details like that are concerned, why something might be preferable to another action or another time. And we have staff here that I'm sure can give you the details on that answer. But all those things were considered, timing, advantageous interest rates and things like that. And did we come up with a perfect decision? I doubt seriously if we've come up with a perfect decision since I've been on the board. But we came up with what 5 commissioners thought was the best decision for the time. Thank you.
Commissioner Howells, how was the consultant selected for the courthouse and jail?
As I found out at the October 2nd meeting, the consultant had been selected by our county administrator. Under our policies, we have where a contract $25,000 and below does not necessarily have to come before the Board of County Commissioners. But to qualify for such a contract, you have to be able to state whoever is going to be finally okaying the contract that there's something, that there's some reason, particularly if you're not going to go out for competitive bid and you're just going to give it to someone. Actually, the $25,000 below even does call for at least getting 3 bids. In this case, we did not. We simply went with next level at the as the selected person by the county, as the selected company by the county administrator. And as I said a little bit ago in my talks, that really did concern me because if some of you will remember, it wasn't too long ago, maybe a year or so, we had some contract disputes in our IT department, pretty much based on the same thing, $25,000 and below. $25,000